the humiliation. I remember the hallway like it was carved into my memory in high definition. The fluorescent lights reflected off the polished office floors, the chatter of interns and executives blending into a dull hum that pressed against my skull. I was just another hopeful applicant, clutching a worn leather portfolio under my arm. My shoes, old, scuffed, and mismatched in color from years of wear, clicked against the tile, announcing my presence as if they were laughing at me before anyone else could. And then she appeared. Clara Hargrove, polished, perfectly dressed, with a smile that could charm CEOs and intimidate the timid alike. She was reviewing resumes at the front desk, her perfectly manicured nails scrolling through a tablet. She glanced up, and her eyes immediately locked on my shoes. "Oh, those shoes," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "You're serious, right? You actually wore those here." A few people around us snickered. My face burned, heat crawling up my neck. I opened my mouth, trying to explain, not the shoes, not the circumstances, but the work, the talent, the potential I was bringing, but no words came out. She laughed, a sharp, cutting laugh, and shook her head. "Good luck, sweetie. You're gonna need it." That was it. A simple, dismissive sentence, but it was enough to make the day feel like it had swallowed me whole. I left the office, my portfolio heavier than it should have been, the scuffed shoes suddenly a symbol of every limitation I had ever faced. That night, I walked home to the cold streets, the city lights reflecting off puddles. I didn't have much, barely enough for rent, no fancy wardrobe, just determination that no pair of shoes could diminish. But in my mind, I began constructing a plan. I wasn't going to let Clara Hargrove's words define me. I wasn't going to let her mockery be the last note of the day. If she thought her words could crush me, she hadn't accounted for resilience. I spent the next morning at the local library, scanning through company directories, business filings, and market trends. I learned everything I could about the organization I've been trying to join, the clients, the executives, the weaknesses, the opportunities. If she was confident, she was blind to the bigger picture. By the afternoon, I had drafted a strategy, a plan not to beg for a job, not to plead for recognition, but to create undeniable value that would make her and the company come to me. The next day, I returned not to her office, not to plead, but with a proposition. I had gathered data on one of the company's biggest clients, analyzing patterns, missed opportunities, and overlooked strategies. I designed a comprehensive proposal, innovative marketing ideas, cost-saving logistics improvements, and a roadmap that could double their engagement within 6 months. I knocked on the front desk where Clara sat. She looked up, eyebrows raised. "Back so soon?" she asked, smirking. "I came with a proposal," I said, holding up a slim folder. "One that could help your company with a client you might have overlooked." Her smirk faltered slightly, curiosity flickering across her face. She motioned for me to sit. I laid out the presentation with confidence, every slide precise, every point backed by data. I didn't speak of shoes. I didn't speak of mockery. I spoke of opportunity, results, and value. By the end of the presentation, the room was quiet. Clara sat back, a mix of surprise and calculation in her eyes. "You did this on your own?" she asked, her voice slightly less assured than before. "Yes," I replied simply. "I noticed what you might have missed." She hesitated, glancing at the team behind her, then back at me. This could actually work. We'd need someone to implement it." I nodded. "I'm available." That evening, I walked home with a quiet satisfaction. Her words from a previous day echoed in my mind, but now they sounded different, distant, almost irrelevant. The shoes still scuffed, my wallet still thin, but the confidence in my own abilities now shone brighter than any mockery. I knew this was only the beginning. Not only had I turned humiliation into opportunity, but I had also sent a message that would echo far longer than a single laugh. And somewhere in that office, Clara Hargrove sat, staring at my proposal, her pride bruised, realizing that the person she had mocked was the person she might need to save her own company, the proposal. The next morning, I arrived at the office with the calm confidence of someone who had nothing left to prove to anyone, except through results. Clara Hargrove was already at her desk, reviewing emails, her posture crisp and confident. The same woman who had mocked my shoes, the same person who had laughed at my presence, now glanced up with something between curiosity and skepticism. "You're here early," she said, her voice neutral but her eyes sharp. "I prefer to start before everyone else." I replied, placing my folder on the desk. "I wanted to make sure you had everything before the meeting." Her eyebrows rose slightly. "All right, let's see it." I opened the folder, revealing charts, graphs, and strategies I compiled overnight. My fingers traced the clean edges of the papers as I began to explain. "This is a proposal for your top-tier client, Eastwood Enterprises." I began, based on public data and market trends. I noticed gaps in your engagement strategy and areas where operational inefficiencies are costing both time and money. If implemented, this approach could increase client retention by at least 35% and boost revenue by 20% within 6 months. Clara leaned in, her expression sharpening. "This is detailed." I nodded. "It is, and I've already drafted a timeline for implementation, including team assignments and metrics for measuring progress." The room fell quiet as I laid out each point, anticipating objections, addressing potential risks, and demonstrating not only knowledge of the company's operations, but also creative solutions that had not occurred to anyone on her team. By the time I finished, Clara was silent for a moment, the kind of silence that carries a mix of surprise, doubt, and awe. "You did this all by yourself?" she asked, her voice slightly tremulous, betraying the confidence she always projected. "Yes," I replied simply. "I noticed opportunities you might have overlooked." Her lips pressed together. She hesitated, then finally said, "If this works, we'll need someone to lead the implementation. Someone who understands it inside and out." I met her gaze steadily. "I'm available over the next week." I worked closely with Clara and her team, not because I had a title, but because results spoke louder than corporate hierarchy. At first, some colleagues were skeptical. Whispers of "who is this guy?" and "how did he get in here?" floated through the office. But as metrics began to improve, as client communications grew smoother, as revenue forecasts edged upward, those whispers turned into acknowledgement, admiration, and eventually reliance. Clara, who had mocked me just days before, began to realize the value of my insight. One afternoon, she approached me privately. "Malik," she said, her voice quieter than usual, "I underestimated you. You've turned things around faster than anyone expected. I think we need you officially on the team." I nodded slowly, letting the moment linger. The irony was not lost on me. The same woman who had laughed at my shoes was now asking me to join her in a position of influence. "Yes," I said, "I'm ready, but on my terms. I won't just follow. I'll lead where I know we can make the most impact." Her eyes widened slightly, but she nodded. "Fair. I agree." The weeks that followed were transformative. I implemented new strategies, optimized client relations, and introduced a system of accountability and innovation within the department. My previous status, the outsider, the person mocked for his appearance in humble circumstances, became irrelevant. Only results mattered. Clara, initially proud of her own decision-making, began deferring to my judgment in subtle ways. She would ask for my input before presenting to higher management, rely on my forecasts, and even suggest my ideas to board as collaborative insights. And yet, the tension remained, the delicate balance between my growing influence and her desire to maintain authority. One afternoon, she confronted me privately, her tone hesitant. "Malik, I don't know if I can admit this publicly, but you've changed everything. The clients, the metrics, the morale, it's all improved because of you. I don't know how we ever managed without your insight." I smiled, though not smugly. "It wasn't about you realizing it. It was about solving the problem. That's always been my focus. Recognition will come when it's earned." She looked away, a mix of embarrassment and respect in her eyes. For the first time, she wasn't the one in control. She was learning, slowly, awkwardly, but undeniably, that competence could not be ignored. The pinnacle of this transformation came when I was asked to present our department's results to the executive board. For months, I had worked behind the scenes, guiding decisions, correcting inefficiencies, and introducing strategies that would double revenue projections. Standing before the board, I detailed every improvement, every saved contract, every optimization. I cited data, presented forecasts, and proposed future initiatives. By the end of the presentation, the executives were nodding, impressed, and clearly grateful. Clara, seated at the edge of the table, met my gaze. Her usual confident mask was gone, replaced with the acknowledgement that I had earned a place she herself had once thought I could never occupy. And in that moment, I realized something vital. The power of capability outweighs appearances, arrogance, and mockery. But even as recognition began to settle in, I knew the story wasn't over. Challenges would arise. Competitors would attempt to undermine our progress. Office politics would continue to test me. And Clara, now dependent on my abilities, would face the uncomfortable truth of having underestimated me, a dynamic that promised tension, conflict, and opportunities yet to unfold. The day ended with a subtle text from an unknown number. You're proving yourself. But this is only the beginning. Bigger tests await. I looked at Clara across the office, realizing that the balance of power had shifted. She had laughed at my old shoes, but tomorrow she might be asking me to lead the company, the department, or even a decision that could shape her entire career. And I smiled quietly, knowing that the next steps would test not just my skills, but patience, strategy, and resilience. The rise. The morning air in the office was crisp, filled with a subtle hum of computers, phones, and footsteps across polished floors. I walked past the reception, my worn leather shoes long replaced by a sturdy pair that could withstand long days of work. But the memory of Clara Hargrove's laughter still lingered in my mind, fueling a quiet determination. Since accepting the informal position in the department, I had established myself as a problem solver, a strategist, and someone whose insight could not be ignored. Clients began to request meetings directly with me. Internal projects moved faster, smoother, and more efficiently than ever before. And Clara? She had begun to rely on my judgment in ways she would never openly admit. One day, a major crisis hit. A top client threatened to pull their contract due to delayed deliverables. Clara was flustered, pacing in the corner of the office. I don't know what to do. If we lose this client, it could set us back months. I approached calmly. Step aside. I said, projecting confidence. Let me handle it. Using data analytics, a streamlined communication plan, and direct engagement with the client, I orchestrated a turnaround in just 3 days. By the 4th, the client not only stayed but increased their investment in our services. Clara watched the exchange quietly, her pride clearly bruised, though she didn't voice it. I realized in that respect, even grudging respect, had replaced mockery. She had begun to understand that the person she had belittled was now indispensable. As the department's success grew, whispers spread throughout the office. Employees who had once ignored or dismissed me now approached for guidance. Teams began to ask for my input before making proposals. My reputation, built quietly, skillfully, and through action, was spreading faster than I had anticipated. One evening, after a long day of strategizing and client calls, Clara approached me privately. "Malik, I need to confess something," she said, her usual assertiveness tempered by humility. "I misjudged you. Your insights, they've changed everything. I need you officially on the team in a position of authority, not just consulting." I looked at her steadily. "I told you before, Clara, I'll work where I know I can make an impact. Authority comes with results, not titles." Her eyes softened. "I see that now." Over the next few months, my influence within the company grew exponentially. I proposed new initiatives, an internal mentorship program, automated client management systems, and an innovation task force to address overlooked opportunities. Every proposal was backed by data, foresight, and actionable steps. The board noticed. Executives who had once ignored me began seeking my advice. And the subtle shift in office dynamics was evident. Those who had mocked me, underestimated me, or ignored me now found themselves dependent on my expertise. Yet power brings scrutiny. Not everyone welcomed my rise. A senior manager, one of Clara's longtime allies, began to undermine my recommendations, questioning every suggestion in meetings, attempting to take credit for initiatives I had led behind the scenes. I didn't confront him immediately. Instead, I documented every interaction, every successful outcome tied to my strategies, and waited. Timing, I knew, was crucial. The day of reckoning came during a high-stakes client pitch. The senior manager attempted to lead, presenting half-baked ideas while I observed quietly. Halfway through, the client challenged a proposal, pointing out inefficiencies the manager couldn't address. I stepped in, calmly explaining a solution I had crafted days earlier. The client's eyes lit up. The proposal succeeded beyond expectations. In that moment, the office realized something undeniable. The person who had once been mocked was now the cornerstone of the company's success. Clara approached me after the meeting. You were right all along," she whispered. "Your strategies, they saved the pitch, saved the client. I can't believe I doubted you." I smiled, not triumphantly, but with quiet satisfaction. It's not about belief, Clara. It's about results. Actions speak louder than words, and persistence outlasts ridicule. The board requested a formal presentation of my strategies. I accepted, knowing this would solidify my position officially. For the first time, my work would be recognized publicly, not just behind the scenes. As I prepared for the presentation, a subtle message appeared on my phone. "Impressive. You've turned the tides. But there are greater challenges ahead. Are you ready?" I smiled. The hint of future obstacles only strengthened my resolve. Power, influence, and recognition were intoxicating, but I knew humility, strategy, and vigilance were equally crucial. Standing before the board, I presented my roadmap for company expansion, risk mitigation, and innovation. Every slide demonstrated foresight, every recommendation backed by measurable outcomes. The executives were captivated. The room buzzed with approval and admiration. Clara sat at the front, watching intently, her earlier mockery now replaced by respect, though I knew her pride still lingered. By the end of the meeting, the board unanimously approved my proposals. I had officially risen, not through favoritism, not through luck, but through competence, perseverance, and vision. Yet, even in victory, the story remained unfinished. Opportunities for betrayal, sabotage, and unforeseen crises loomed. Competitors, envious peers, and industry pressures threatened to disrupt the momentum. And Clara, once the instigator of my humiliation, now depended on me. Her next move would determine whether she became an ally, an obstacle, or something more complicated. I walked back to my office, contemplating the delicate balance of power, influence, and respect. The city skyline stretched endlessly beyond the window, a reminder that the world offered both opportunity and challenge. I had risen from mockery to authority. I had transformed a workplace and proven my worth. But I knew the final act, the culmination of my journey, was still ahead. The next chapter would test everything: skill, patience, and the ability to navigate ambition, envy, and the lingering shadows of those who had once doubted me. The triumph. The morning sunlight poured into my office, cutting through the blinds and illuminating the city skyline beyond. I stood by the window, reflecting on the journey that had brought me here. From the humiliation of Clara Hargrove's laughter at my worn-out shoes to the undeniable authority I now held, every step had been deliberate, every obstacle a lesson. The office was buzzing, clients calling for updates, employees reviewing new strategies, and executives preparing for quarterly review. I had transformed from an overlooked applicant into the linchpin of the department. The power dynamic had shifted, yet I knew the balance was fragile. Clara approached, her usual confident demeanor softened by humility and respect. "Malik," she said almost cautiously, "the board is reviewing your latest proposals. They're impressed. Again, I don't know how you do it." I smiled. It's not about me. It's about seeing what others overlook and executing where others hesitate. Results speak louder than words. She nodded slowly, her eyes reflecting the grudging admiration that had replaced her earlier mockery. "I underestimated you. I won't make that mistake again." Her words were almost a relief, not because I needed validation, but because they marked a shift in the company culture. Even she, The person who had once mocked me now recognized the value of talent, persistence, and vision. Weeks passed, and the department thrived. My strategies expanded into new markets, implemented automation to streamline operations, and introduced innovation initiatives that competitors struggled to replicate. I wasn't just part of the company anymore. I had become a force shaping its direction. Yet the greatest triumph wasn't metrics or accolades. It was watching employees, once overlooked or dismissed, now step into their potential. I had mentored, guided, and empowered them, creating a team that could accomplish what the company had never thought possible. The Carter Initiative, as I had named it, became a symbol of what determination, skill, and strategy could achieve when freed from prejudice. But success invites scrutiny, envy, and challenge. One afternoon, I received a confidential report. A rival company had noticed our growth and was attempting to poach our clients. Internal sabotage from jealous colleagues also threatened to undermine some of our initiatives. I didn't panic. Instead, I methodically analyzed the threats, devised contingency plans, and implemented measures to secure our achievements. My team executed flawlessly, mitigating risks before they could escalate. It was during this time that Clara approached me with an uncharacteristic vulnerability. "Malik, I need your advice. I've never faced pressure like this before. You always know what to do." I regarded her steadily. Leadership isn't about knowing everything. It's about making decisions when stakes are highest, relying on the team, and staying adaptable. Remember that. Her eyes softened with gratitude. "I'm lucky you were here." I smiled, acknowledging the truth while maintaining the balance of authority. The dynamic had shifted entirely. She was no longer the one in control. The tables had turned, and the person she had dismissed had become indispensable. The decisive moment came during a board meeting, where the executives debated future strategies for expansion and client retention. I presented a comprehensive plan for the next fiscal year, aggressive, bold, and data-driven. The room listened, captivated by every detail. Halfway through, a senior board member raised concern, suggesting that our growth might be too risky. I countered with precise forecasts, risk mitigations, and success scenarios. Each objection was met with logic, evidence, and foresight. By the end of the meeting, the board unanimously approved the strategy. Clara watched silently, her admiration clear. She had come to understand something profound. The person she had mocked for old shoes had become the architect of the company's future. As the meeting concluded, I returned to my office, alone for a moment, and reflected on the journey. Humiliation had been my catalyst. The mockery had ignited a fire I never knew existed. Each step had been calculated, deliberate, and driven by the desire to prove that talent, persistence, and vision cannot be ignored. And yet, even in triumph, I felt the familiar stirrings of anticipation. Challenges would come, competitors, unforeseen crises, and internal conflicts. The world was vast, unpredictable, and full of obstacles designed to test resilience and skill. A subtle notification appeared on my phone, an anonymous message. "You've succeeded beyond expectations. But the greatest tests are still ahead. Are you ready for what comes next?" I smiled, leaning back in my chair. The city lights shimmered like 1,000 possibilities outside my window. Clara knocked lightly and entered. "Malik, the company owes you everything. How did you know where to start?" I looked at her calmly. I didn't know exactly, but I knew one thing. The person who was underestimated once has an advantage the world can't see: foresight, strategy, and patience. And that advantage never disappears. She nodded slowly, understanding more than she could admit aloud. I knew the next chapter was coming, larger and more challenging than anything I had faced so far. But I was ready. I had risen from mockery to authority, from disregard to influence, and nothing could erase the lessons learned along the way. Because one thing was certain. The shoes had been scuffed, the laughter had stung, but the person who refuses to be defeated is the one who ultimately controls the story. And my story was far from over. The Yendi, with a world of possibilities open for future challenges.